This whole story ends with brand new rules, fresh warnings, and one brutally expensive lesson about what happens when you try to punch a Deathworld species. Nobody at Krathodsik Station Academy thought the semester would wrap up with the Interspecies Conduct Handbook getting completely torn apart and rewritten. Yet here we are. And all of it traces back to the moment Zerath and Korvath, who somehow managed to be a walking monument to confidence he absolutely had not earned, decided to stick his manipulator appendage where it had no business being. For anyone unfamiliar with the place, Krathodsik Station Academy sits right at the intersection of 17 major trade routes and functions as the top educational institution for the Galactic Council's most privileged children. We're talking ambassador kids, corporate heirs, military brass offspring, and every now and then a hereditary monarch who still believes titles mean something in the 34th century. Just paying tuition there could bankroll a small colony for 3 straight years. The waiting list was longer than a Vrelnak's mating tentacle, and somehow even more miserable to deal with. The Academy liked to brag about diversity. There were 63 species represented in the student body, cutting-edge environmental systems that could switch from methane-heavy air to full aquatic habitats in under 4 minutes, and food from just about every corner of known space. Although, honestly, the less said about Glorthian nutrient paste, the better. Everyone coexisted. Everyone followed the rules. Everyone respected the careful social structure that kept hundreds of apex predators, hive minds, and silicon-based philosophers from turning the dorms into a battlefield. And then the humans arrived. The cafeteria on Sub-Level 9 was designed for oxygen breathers with carbon-based biology, which meant it was packed solid during third meal rotation. Zarathan, as usual, held court at the central table like he owned the place. Members of the Corvain species stood around 8 feet tall and looked like someone had decided muscle alone wasn't enough, so they stacked more muscle on top of bone and then added even more muscle before wrapping the whole thing in thick gray-blue hide capable of stopping most small arms fire. Their homeworld ran at nearly 3 times standard gravity, which meant Zarathan could, and often did, treat most other species like especially delicate furniture. Harper Lane stood in the food line with a tray in her hands, keeping to herself. She was new. 3 weeks into the semester, and part of the human integration program the Galactic Council had forced through despite heavy opposition, nobody really knew what to think about humans yet. They looked harmless enough. Soft skin, no natural armor, no impressive claws or fangs, and bipedal, which was common. They came from some out-of-the-way planet called Earth, recently labeled a protected death world, though most people assumed that was just political exaggeration to earn them a seat at the table. The argument started over something completely stupid. It always does. Zarathan wanted the final serving of something called chocolate cake, a human treat the kitchen had made as part of a cultural outreach effort. Cassidy got to it first. Words were exchanged. Surrounded by his usual pack of sycophants and hangers-on, Zarathan decided his reputation demanded action, so he shoved her. Not hard by his standards, just a casual backhand to the shoulder. The same dismissive move he'd used on dozens of students who didn't know their place. The kind of gesture that said, "I'm bigger, I'm stronger, and you will move." Cassidy didn't move. She turned slowly and looked at him. Really looked at him. Her expression didn't change at all. She didn't raise her voice. She just stood there, tray in hand, chocolate cake fairly claimed, and stared. Zarathan mistook that stillness for defiance instead of the warning it actually was, and that became his second mistake. He reached out with his primary manipulator, planning to physically remove her from his way. His appendage struck the side of her head. The sound echoed through the cafeteria, a solid, unmistakable thwack that made everyone within 20 feet stop eating, stop talking, and stop breathing. 300 students from 40 different species froze, waiting for the obvious outcome. The fragile human would collapse. Medical would be called. Paperwork would follow. Zarathan's family would donate some credits. Life would move on. Cassidy's head shifted about 4 degrees to the left from the impact. Then she straightened, rolled her neck once, then again, and locked eyes with Zarathan. She smiled. It was not a friendly smile. For the first time in his gravity-forged, privilege-soaked life, Zarathan felt something cold and unfamiliar crawl up his spine. His manipulator ached. No, throbbed. He stared down at it, confused, and noticed the main joint was already swelling. Cassidy took a bite of her chocolate cake, chewed slowly, and swallowed before speaking. "You're going to want to get that checked out," she said, her voice carrying clean across the silent cafeteria. "Hitting bone tends to hurt, even for someone as tough as you seem to think you are." Then she walked away. Zarathan stood there, cradling his rapidly swelling appendage, while 300 pairs of eyes from 40 species watched his expression cycle through confusion, pain, and the creeping realization that he had just made a truly catastrophic mistake. The silence held for exactly 5 more seconds before the cafeteria erupted. Security Chief Draxon reached Sub-Level 9 in under 90 seconds after the alert, which was impressive considering he had 6 legs and the turbolift was down for maintenance. He was a Kefrit, built low and wide, with sensory organs capable of picking up emotional pheromones from 3 corridors away. Right now, those organs were telling him the cafeteria was drenched in panic, excitement, and an unsettling amount of vindictive satisfaction. All right. Back to your meals. Nothing to see here," he announced, his translation collar flattening his clicking speech into standard galactic common. That was a lie, of course. There was absolutely something to see. Specifically, Zarathan sulking at a medical station table, his manipulator appendage puffed up to nearly twice its normal size, while his entourage orbited him like worried little moons. "She attacked me," Zarathan insisted, his voice tight with pain and wounded pride. "She's human. She hit me." Draxon didn't argue right away. He pulled up the security footage on his wrist display and watched it. Then he watched it again. Then a third time, because his brain was refusing to accept what his eyes and sensors were very clearly showing him. He zoomed in on the moment of impact, enhanced the audio, checked the timestamps to make sure this wasn't some elaborate student prank involving edited footage. It wasn't. Zarathan had struck first, twice, and the human had walked away like nothing had happened. "You're going to want to revise that statement," Draxon said carefully. "What I'm seeing here is you initiating physical contact with another student. Twice." The crowd hadn't dispersed. If anything, it had grown larger. Luvira, one of Zarathan's usual companions, a slim Varanthi with a reputation for frighteningly good pattern recognition, was aggressively scrolling through her datapad. Her face, or the closest thing her species had to one, drained of color. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, what?" demanded Tharvik, another member of the group. "I looked up Earth," Luvira said, her voice jumping half an octave. "The real classification files, not the orientation summary. It's a Class 12 Deathworld. Class 12. The packet said Class 7. Someone made a typo, or lied, or ancestors preserve us." They rounded down for political reasons. That did it. Students all around started pulling up their own datapads. The cafeteria filled with the sounds of frantic searches and quiet horror as realization spread like a contagion. Humans had been admitted to Krathodzik Station Academy under the Galactic Council's Diversity Initiative, a program pushed through by diplomats over the loud objections of just about everyone involved in education. The humans wanted a seat at the big table. They wanted their kids educated alongside the elite of galactic society. And somehow, they had the leverage to make it happen. Trade goods, strategic resources, political pressure. All of it from a species that had only cracked faster-than-light travel 40 years earlier. So a compromise was reached. Admit a small number of human students. Observe them. Evaluate them. See if they could survive the academic pressure without dying or accidentally starting a diplomatic disaster. Nobody bothered doing a serious deep dive into human physiology. Why would they? The initial scans showed soft tissue, no armor, standard carbon-based life, one gravity preference, oxygen breathing, organic diet. Squishy, ordinary, harmless. The Corvine, on the other hand, were well understood. High-gravity specialists. Their children were born under twice standard gravity and considered it comfortable. By adolescence, they could operate in environments that would crush most species into loose components. They were strong, they were tough, and they knew it. Zarathorax came from old money and even older arrogance. His family owned major mining operations across 4 systems. They donated generously to the Academy. In return, they expected, reasonably from their point of view, that their son would be treated with proper deference, that he would dominate socially and physically, that it was his right. That right was currently throbbing in time with his heartbeat, while a medical drone scanned it and emitted quiet, judgmental beeps. Headmaster Malvarix received the incident alert in the middle of a virtual conference with the Board of Governors. He was a Thranduil, a species famous for diplomatic finesse and the ability to see 12 political moves ahead. Right now, he was seeing 0 good outcomes. "Excuse me," he said to the board, his 4 eyes cycling rapidly through stress colors. "We appear to have a situation." He read the preliminary report, then the security transcript. Then he covered his face with his primary manipulators and made a sound the translator struggled with before settling on profound dismay, layered with existential dread. "Get me everything we have on human physiology," he said to his assistant. "The real files, not the orientation summary, and find that human student before this becomes a full diplomatic incident." His assistant, a competent young Frillian named Rinella, nodded quickly. "Sir, should we contact the Sulkeet family?" Malvarix's eyes darkened to a deep purple. "Oh, they'll contact us. Probably within 10 minutes. Prepare shielding for my communication console. This is going to get loud." Back in the cafeteria, Harper Lane had settled into a quiet corner table and was calmly finishing her chocolate cake. Her datapad was open, and she appeared to be working on homework for Xenobiology 301. She looked completely unconcerned by the chaos she'd accidentally set in motion. Jorvik approached her carefully, his sensory organs picking up absolutely nothing. No fear, no aggression, no emotional spike at all. "Miss Morgan," he said, "I'm going to need you to come with me." She looked up, swallowed the last bite of cake, and nodded. "Sure." "Am I in trouble?" "That," Jorvik replied slowly, "is an excellent question. I genuinely don't know yet. The medical bay on level 4 was equipped to handle every major biological classification in known space. Isolation chambers, regeneration tanks, biochemical synthesizers, and one very tired Dr. Kelmore. She had been 3 hours from the end of her shift when the alert came in. Dr. Kelmore was a Prixian, 6 precision sensory organs, extraordinary motor control, and absolutely no patience for nonsense. She'd worked at the Academy for 12 years. She'd seen sports injuries, lab explosions, and that one zero-gravity mating ritual incident nobody talked about anymore. This, though? This was new. "Let me make sure I have this straight," she said, sweeping her scanning device over Zarathan's swollen appendage. "You struck the human student with your primary manipulator at roughly 40% of your maximum output." "I barely touched her," Zarathan protested, though his voice wobbled despite himself. The pain meds were taking the edge off, but not nearly enough. It was nothing. Just a tap. She should have stepped aside. Uh-huh. Dr. Kelmore pulled the scan results up on her display. All 6 of her sensory organs locked onto the data, then pulled back, then refocused again. A sharp whistling sound escaped her, Prixian shorthand for deep professional confusion. "Your primary metacarpal joint is fractured," she said. The secondary support structure is cracked in 3 locations, and there is extensive soft tissue trauma consistent with a high-velocity impact against a dense, unyielding surface. That's impossible, Zarathan said flatly. I am Corvain. Our skeletal structure withstands 12 times standard gravity. Our strike force is measured in the thousands of pressure units. She is human. Humans are soft. Everyone knows that. Everyone, Dr. Kelmore replied carefully, appears to have been operating with bad information. She brought up Cassidy's scan on the adjacent display. The human sat on the examination platform with her legs swinging slightly, looking about as worried as someone waiting for public transit. Dr. Kelmore had already run every diagnostic she could think of. Twice. Miss Morgan, she said slowly, you have a mild bruise on the left temporal region, approximately 2 centimeters across. Minor capillary damage. No concussion, no fractures, no neural trauma. She paused. How do you feel? Fine, Cassidy said. Mostly annoyed I dropped my cake on the walk over here. That was the last piece. You dropped? Your cake, Dr. Kelmore repeated, pronouncing the words like she'd never encountered them before. You were struck by a Corvine with enough force to shatter his own appendage, and your primary concern is dessert? It was really good cake. Zarathan stared at her. Really stared. The medication had dulled his senses, but even through the chemical haze, his brain was struggling with something that made no sense, something that could not make sense. He had hit her. He had felt the impact. She should be in a regeneration tank, not sitting upright complaining about pastries. What are you? He asked, and the question came out smaller than he'd meant it to. Cassidy tilted her head, considering. Human. Exchange student. Xenobiology major. Currently very hungry because someone made me miss dinner. Security Chief Draxon, who had been quietly reviewing footage and incident logs in the corner, cleared his throat. Doctor, can you explain what happened here? Preferably in terms the rest of us can understand. Dr. Kelmore brought up a comparative skeletal analysis on the main display. The Corvine skeletal system is impressive, she began, but it is optimized for its native environment. High gravity, yes, but within stable, predictable limits. Their bones are dense, their muscles are powerful, they evolved under consistent physical laws. She highlighted Zarathan's scan. When this student struck Miss Morgan, he expected her skull to behave like that of a Varanthe or Frillian, something that absorbs impact, deforms slightly, and distributes force. Then she pulled up Cassidy's cranial scan. Even without a medical background, the difference was obvious. The density was absurd. The structural integrity looked more like armored plating than organic bone. Human skeletal systems evolved on a death world defined by chaos. Variable gravity stress, frequent high-energy impacts, rapid acceleration, and sustained load trauma. Their bones are not just dense, they are the product of millions of years of evolutionary reinforcement. Miss Morgan's skull did not deform. It did not flex. It did not give. Dr. Kelmore zoomed in on the impact site. From a mechanical standpoint, Zarathan striking her was equivalent to punching a Durasteel bulkhead, bare-handed, at speed. The room went silent. But she's so small, Zarathan said weakly. She looks fragile. Yes, Dr. Kelmore replied, and it turns out those are very different things. She closed the displays. Your species evolved to endure high gravity. Miss Morgan's species evolved to survive it, along with extreme temperatures, hostile ecosystems, aggressive megafauna, and pandemic-level disease. She glanced at a new file and winced. And apparently something called Australian wildlife, which I refuse to analyze in detail because it is already causing me anxiety. But the orientation materials said humans were Class 7, Luvira said from the doorway. She'd followed them into medical, datapad clutched tight. Class 7 is manageable. Class 7 is normal-ish. The orientation materials, Draxon said grimly while pulling up his own display, appear to have been either a clerical error or a politically motivated understatement. Earth is officially classified as a Class 12 death world. Class 12. That places it alongside Vrax Prime, actively volcanic, and Kreshtar, where the atmosphere is mildly acidic and metallic shards fall from the sky. Cassidy raised her hand a little. To be fair, Earth isn't that bad. I mean, yes, we have earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, droughts, blizzards, venomous everything, and predators that think humans are crunchy and taste good with ketchup. But you get used to it. You get used to it, Zarathan repeated faintly. Sure, Cassidy said with a shrug. Humans are pretty adaptable. It's kind of our thing. We're not the strongest species, not the fastest, probably not the smartest. But we're really, really good at not dying when everything is actively trying to kill us. And on Earth, that's basically everything. All the time. It builds character. Dr. Kelmore made a note on her datapad. I'm going to need to completely rewrite human medical protocols, and probably request stronger pain medication. For everyone else. Zarathan looked down at his swollen, fractured appendage. Then at Cassidy, calmly checking messages on her datapad. Then back at his appendage. I need to contact my family, he said quietly. Yes, Brontol replied without hesitation. Yes, you do. Because this was about to get complicated. The student network at Kratzek Station Academy moved information faster than a quantum data burst on a good day. By the time Zarathan was released from medical, with his appendage locked into a regenerative cast and a prescription for industrial-grade pain suppressants, every single student on the station already knew exactly what had happened. Most of them had seen the footage. All of them had opinions. The Varanthi students, who usually carried themselves with an air of intellectual superiority, had clustered in the library and were running calculations at a frantic pace. Fip Korvathariska had somehow become the unofficial spokesperson. Her datapad was linked to the main display while a crowd gathered behind her. Okay, so Earth's gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared, she said, her manipulators flying across the interface. That's almost exactly one standard galactic unit, which is why nobody questioned it. But look at this. She brought up a comparative chart. Varath, our homeworld, runs at 0.7 standard. Frilla sits at 0.6. The Kefret homeworld is around 0.85. She paused for effect. Even the Corvain, who everyone assumes are unstoppable walking tanks, evolved on a planet with 2.7 standard gravity. So, Tharvik said, though the confidence he usually carried was gone. 1 standard gravity is normal. That's the baseline, Fip Korvathariska snapped. The baseline we use for station construction, you absolute fool. Because it's the mathematical average across council species. But it isn't normal for most of us. Humans don't live at the average. They live at 1 full unit. Constantly. From birth. Their entire evolutionary history happened under that load. She pulled up another display showing Earth's rotation, axial tilt, and orbital data. And it gets worse. Their planet has extreme axial tilt, which means brutal seasonal swings. Temperature shifts of 40 degrees or more. Their atmosphere contains oxygen levels that would poison half the species in this room if sustained long-term. And their weather systems routinely produce wind speeds over 200 kilometers per hour. And they just deal with that? A Frillian student named Quantal raised a delicate manipulator. They build structures and complain about the forecast? Surely the Deathworld classification refers to the environment, not the species. A dangerous planet doesn't automatically mean a dangerous inhabitant. Fip Korvathariska stared at him. The species evolved on the planet. They are shaped by it. Every aspect of their biology is tuned for survival there. Bone density, muscle fiber structure, cardiovascular efficiency, immune response, and brain chemistry that apparently makes charging predators with sharpened sticks feel like a valid strategy. She scrolled again. Do you know what the dominant predator on Earth was for most of their evolutionary history? Humans. They are the apex predator on a Class 12 death world. Let that sink in. It was sinking in. Across the academy, dorms, common areas, lecture halls, the same realization was spreading. Humans weren't guests. They weren't charity admits or political tokens. They were survivors of an environment that would kill most galactic species within a single planetary rotation. The memes followed almost immediately. Someone edited the cafeteria footage with dramatic music and slow-motion effects. It spread with the caption, "When you forget to check the spec sheet." Another showed Cassidy's completely neutral expression with the text, "Oh no." Anyway. A third featured a skull density comparison chart, complete with increasingly horrified reactions from various species. Faculty reacted more carefully, but no less nervously. Professor Ardent, who taught advanced physics, pulled up Earth's planetary specs during a lecture and spent 40 minutes recalculating force equations while his students watched in fascinated dread. If we assume an average human mass of 70 kilograms, he said, covering the display board with equations, and continuous exposure to 9.8 meters per second squared throughout development, then their musculoskeletal systems are under constant load equivalent to what most of us experience during peak physical stress. Constantly. Every moment of every day. Their bodies consider that resting state. A student raised a tentacle. "Professor, does that mean that here, on the station, humans are effectively operating under reduced load?" Professor Ardent's color scales shifted to a pale shade that signaled distress. Yes. Yes, it does. They're carrying roughly 15 to 20% less effective mass than their bodies are calibrated for, which means their strength-to-weight ratio here is, ancestors help us, significantly higher than on their homeworld. So Cassidy wasn't even trying, someone whispered. "Miss Morgan," Professor Ardent corrected absently, still staring at his calculations, was standing still and letting physics do the work. Zarathan struck an object with greater density and structural integrity than his own appendage could withstand. The result was unavoidable. Meanwhile, in Headmaster Malvarix's office, the communication console had been flashing non-stop for 2 hours. The Corvain family had made contact, loudly, repeatedly, with increasing levels of what the translator politely labeled vigorous disagreement. "My son is the victim here," Matriarch Corvath declared, her towering image filling the holodisplay. Even by Corvain standards she was imposing, nearly 9 feet tall, clad in ceremonial armor that probably cost more than the entire medical wing. He was assaulted by this human. We demand her immediate expulsion and full restitution for damages. Malvarix, who had now watched the footage roughly 30 times, resisted the urge to terminate the call. "Matriarch," he said evenly, "with all due respect, your son initiated physical contact. The footage is unambiguous on that point. He barely touched her." "No," Malvarix replied calmly, pulling up the medical reports. "He struck her with enough force to fracture his own appendage. Dr. Kelmore's analysis is thorough and very clear. Your son assaulted another student. That student defended herself by, and I am quoting directly from the report, existing in close proximity to his fist." "This is absurd," the Corvath matriarch snapped. "The Corvath have held seats on the Galactic Council for 300 years. We have status. We have reputation. We will not be humiliated by some upstart species from a backwater system." "The backwater system in question," Malvarix said, his voice sharpening, "is a Class 12 Deathworld that produces sapient persistence hunters with skeletal structures that make Durasteel look delicate. Perhaps your reputation should include not attacking them without provocation." The matriarch's skin tones cycled through several sharp colors. "You are choosing this human over my son." "I am choosing reality over comfortable assumptions," Malvarix replied. "Your son made a mistake, a serious one. The Academy will provide full medical care for his recovery, but there will be consequences for initiating violence against another student. We donate generously to this institution. Yes, and we are grateful. But credits do not alter physics, matriarch. Your son punched a human. He lost. Those are the facts." The call terminated abruptly, logged by the system as excessive force applied to communication controls. Malvarix slumped back in his chair and pulled up the enrollment files for the remaining human students. 6 more, spread across multiple programs, all of them walking around with bone density comparable to armored personnel carriers, muscle efficiency rivaling high-performance machinery, and the casual durability of a species that treated natural selection like a competitive sport. "We're going to need new insurance policies," he said to Rinella, "and probably warning signs. Do we have warning signs for humans?" "No, sir." "Then get some made. Something tasteful. Maybe caution. Deathworld species. Do not strike. And make sure it's translated into multiple languages." On the student network, someone had already created a mock betting pool for the next human-related incident. The odds of another Corvath doing something stupid were surprisingly low. The odds of humans dominating interspecies athletic competitions without even trying were climbing fast. Back in the cafeteria, at the same table where the incident had happened, Cassidy sat with her datapad open, working on homework. She had no idea she'd permanently rewritten the social dynamics of the most prestigious academy in known space, simply by possessing a skull. The disciplinary hearing convened in the Grand Forum on Level 2, a massive chamber designed to accommodate multiple species with wildly different atmospheric and gravitational needs. The adjudication panel consisted of 7 members representing the major student demographics, with Headmaster Malvarix presiding as chair. The gallery was packed. Apparently nothing attracted an audience quite like watching privilege collide with consequences. Zarathan sat at the respondents' table, his appendage still locked in a regenerative cast, flanked by 2 legal representatives his family had hired. They were Corthaxian barristers, famous for aggressive tactics and a success rate that made prosecutors sweat. They looked polished, expensive, ready to win. Cassidy sat alone at the complainant's table. She wore the same casual station clothes she'd had on in the cafeteria. In front of her sat 1 datapad and a drink container labeled coffee. She looked like she would rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. "This hearing will come to order," Malvarix announced, his translation collar carrying his voice across the forum. "We are convened to address the incident that occurred in Sub-Level 9 cafeteria during 3rd meal rotation 4 days ago. The respondent, Zarathan Corvath, stands accused of initiating unprovoked physical violence against fellow student Harper Lane. How does the respondent plead?" The lead barrister stood, all 4 arm appendages moving dramatically. "Not guilty, Headmaster. My client maintains this was a mutual altercation stemming from escalating tensions. Furthermore, we assert that my client is the injured party and is entitled to compensation for medical expenses and emotional trauma." A ripple moved through the gallery. Someone made a sound the translators hesitated over before finally labeling it derisive laughter. "Very well," Malvarix said, leaning back. "Present your evidence." This was going to hurt. The barristers began their case. They presented testimony from Zarathan's friends, each carefully describing the cafeteria argument as heated and mutual. They emphasized Cassidy's recent arrival at the academy, hinting at cultural misunderstandings. They lingered on Zarathan's injuries, projecting detailed medical scans of the fractures. "My client," the lead barrister concluded, "is a model student from a respected family. He has no prior disciplinary record. This human, by contrast, has been here only weeks. Who is more credible?" Security Chief Draxon rose, his 6 legs clicking against the floor as he approached the central display. "If I may, Headmaster, proceed." Draxon pulled up the security footage, unedited, with audio, from 3 separate camera angles. This is what actually happened. The forum watched in complete silence. They saw Zarathan casually backhand Cassidy, saw her remain still, saw him reach out again, saw him strike her head, saw him recoil instantly, clutching his appendage, saw Cassidy take a bite of cake, saw her walk away. "I count 2 instances of Zarathan initiating physical contact," Draxon said. 0 instances of Harper Lane responding with violence. She did not strike back. She did not threaten. She did not raise her voice. She existed. And his appendage broke against her skull. That is not a mutual altercation. That is assault, followed by immediate karmic consequences. The barristers huddled, whispering urgently. Their confidence had evaporated. "We would like to call the complainant to testify," the lead barrister said, desperation bleeding into his voice. Cassidy stood and walked to the testimony platform. She did not look nervous. She looked bored, like this whole thing was barely worth her time. "Miss Morgan," the barrister said, clearing his throat, "is it true that you and my client were arguing before the incident?" "Yes." "And would you agree that emotions were running high?" "I mean," she said, shrugging a little, "he seemed pretty upset about cake." I was hungry. That part wasn't complicated. "But you refused to yield when he requested the item." "Requested?" Cassidy rolled the word around like she was tasting it. "He demanded, and I didn't move." I had gotten to the cake first. In my world, that's a simple rule. First come, first served. I honestly thought that applied everywhere. "Is it possible you misunderstood?" The barrister tried again. "My client belongs to a species known for exceptional strength and durability. Surely you understood that confronting a Salkite physically would be dangerous." "Oh, I understood completely." Cassidy took a slow sip of her coffee. "That's why I didn't hit him back." "That would have been dangerous," the barrister said cautiously. "For him," she replied flatly. "So you're saying you could have injured my client?" "I'm saying I didn't want anyone ending up in a regeneration tank over chocolate cake. And for the record, it was really good chocolate cake, so I get why he wanted it." She shook her head. "But no, I wasn't about to turn dessert into an actual fight. I just stood there. He's the one who decided my face was a good place to swing." "And you expect this panel to believe," the barrister pressed, "that you, a human, could seriously injure a Salkite?" Cassidy set her coffee down gently. "Do you want a demonstration? Because I can tap his cast and show you exactly how much pressure it takes to make him regret his life choices." Even Zarathan flinched at that. The gallery noticed. "That will not be necessary," Willerk said quickly. "Miss Morgan, can you explain why you were unharmed by an impact that fractured Zarathan's appendage?" "Sure." She leaned back like this was basic stuff. "Physics and evolution. I'm from Earth. Earth runs at 1 standard gravity, which is apparently more than most of you are used to. Our bones are dense because they have to be. Our skulls are even denser because our brains matter. Evolution decided wrapping them in what's basically organic armor was a good investment." She shrugged again. "He hit me hard enough to hurt himself. Not hard enough to hurt me. That's not my fault." Panel member Vyrix, a Varanthi biologist, leaned forward. "For the record, Miss Morgan, can you confirm Earth's official Deathworld classification?" "Class 12, she said. "Though honestly, I think that system is a bit dramatic. Yes, Earth has challenges, active tectonics, wild weather, a lot of living things with teeth, venom, and terrible attitudes. But humans adapted. That's kind of our thing." "What sort of challenges are we talking about?" another panel member asked. Cassidy thought for a moment. "Well, we have megafauna that weigh several tons and see humans as food, weather systems that can wipe cities off the map, seismic events that redraw geography, microscopic organisms that can kill us in awful ways, which means our immune systems are basically always at war. Oh, and mosquitoes. They kill more humans every year than any other animal and somehow still haven't gone extinct. That alone should tell you how hard things are to kill on Earth." The room had gone completely silent. "And you just live there?" Vyrix asked. "Yeah," she said. "It's home. You check the weather. You get vaccinated. You don't pet the wildlife. Normal stuff." At the respondents' table, the barristers were frantically scrolling through data pads, reading up on Class 12 Deathworld specs. The horror on their faces was growing by the second. Another human student in the gallery raised his hand. "Can I add something?" Quillrex gave a small gesture of permission. The student stood. "My name's Ethan Yu, human, also from Earth. I just want to say Cassidy's being really modest. Humans don't just survive on Earth. We climb to the top of the food chain. Not with size or speed, with persistence, tools, and spite. We're not the biggest. We're not the fastest. We're not the strongest in raw terms. But we don't quit. We don't stop. And we remember. You know what our ancestors did when they wanted to hunt something bigger and faster than them? They followed it, for days, until it collapsed from exhaustion. Then they ate it. That's human strategy. That's what we are." Another human spoke up, a woman named Maya Delgado. "We also domesticated wolves, took apex predators and turned them into pets using selective breeding and friendship. And we did that while hunting mammoth-sized animals with rocks tied to sticks." Just for context, the panel members exchanged looks. Several of them shifted color in ways that definitely meant stress. Corvix cleared his throat. "Thank you for that illuminating context. Does the defense have anything to add?" The barristers whispered to each other, then shook their heads. "No, Headmaster. We rest our case." Everyone understood what that meant. No defense, no argument. Just a client who had punched a human and paid the price for a bad assumption. The verdict came down 48 hours later, which was record time for the Academy's disciplinary system. Normally, cases like this dragged on for weeks. Not this one. The evidence was clear. The physics were simple. And frankly, no one wanted to stretch out the embarrassment. Zarathan received a formal reprimand on his permanent academic record, a 2-week suspension, mandatory conflict resolution training, and 100 hours of community service in the cafeteria he had disrupted. He was also required to issue a public apology to Harper Lane, delivered in the same grand forum where the hearing had taken place. The apology was short, painful, completely stripped of the casual arrogance he used to wear like armor. He stood at the podium, cast still wrapped around his appendage, reading from a statement his barristers had almost certainly written. "I made assumptions based on incomplete information," he said, his voice barely carrying. "I initiated violence against another student. I was wrong. I apologize to Harper Lane and to the Academy community for my actions." Cassidy sat in the front row. Apparently attendance was mandatory, and nodded once. "Apology accepted," she said. "Don't do it again." The real punishment, though, wasn't official. It was social. Zarathan's family, embarrassed by all the attention the incident had drawn across the galaxy, quietly stepped back from public life at the Academy. His old entourage scattered, unwilling to be linked to someone who had basically become a walking meme. He started eating lunch alone, sitting at tables far from the humans, keeping his head down and avoiding any eye contact. Phip Korvoth, who had immediately distanced herself after digging up the Earth classification data, later admitted she felt a pang of sympathy for him. He was an arrogant fool, she told anyone who would listen, but he honestly didn't know any better. And really, none of us did. The Academy had failed to provide accurate information, and he ended up paying the price for that institutional incompetence. She wasn't wrong. 3 days after the verdict, Headmaster Quillrex announced a series of big changes. First, all species classification data in orientation materials would be audited and corrected. No more rounding, no more sugarcoating. If a species came from a Class 12 Deathworld, students would hear it loud and clear from day one. Second, a new mandatory course was added to the curriculum: Deathworld Species and Survival Adaptations. It wouldn't cover just humans, but also the few other species from extreme environments who had been underestimated over the years. Professor Ardent was tapped to teach it, even though he protested that he was a physics professor, not a xenobiologist. Physics is exactly why their bones don't break, Quillerx told him. And physics is exactly what you need to teach. Third, and maybe the most significant, the Academy started a formal exchange program for cultural education. Human students would give presentations about Earth. Other Deathworld species would share their own experiences. The goal was understanding. The hope was fewer incidents of students punching each other or discovering unpleasant truths about comparative anatomy the hard way. Harper Lane became an accidental celebrity. She couldn't walk down a hallway without students staring, whispering, or occasionally asking for autographs. The student network had turned her into a legend overnight. There were compilation videos of her appearing in security footage, usually just walking to class or studying in the library, narrated dramatically about Deathworld biology. She hated it. "I just want to study xenobiology," she told Ethan Yu over lunch one day, her voice carrying a tired edge. "I didn't come here to become famous for having a skull. Everyone has a skull. Mine just happens to be denser because my ancestors lived somewhere with actual gravity, and predators that thought bipedal apes looked tasty." "You could lean into it," James suggested. "Start a vlog. Humans explain Earth. Monetize the fear and fascination." "Absolutely not. That sounds exhausting," she said, poking at her Varanthi grain dish, nutritious but bland. "I miss real Earth food," she admitted. "Spices that would probably send half the students here to the hospital. The capsaicin thing, yeah, that." She had tried to explain to her Frillian roommate why humans eat peppers that basically burn your mouth. For fun. Her roommate had stared at her like she'd confessed to some sort of recreational self-harm. "Technically, yeah," Cassidy said. "Technically, it builds character." The other human students adapted in their own ways. Maya Delgado started a combat sports club, teaching aliens the basics of human martial arts. 40 students showed up to the first session, 12 to the second, once everyone realized human flexibility and joint mobility was horrifyingly unnatural for species with exoskeletons. James joined the astrophysics research group and kept accidentally intimidating lab partners by lifting equipment that normally required 3 people. Alien students were collectively recalibrating their understanding of the universe. Humans weren't just visitors. They weren't charity cases. They were survivors from a planet that had spent millions of years trying to kill them, and they had survived. Some species found that terrifying. The Frillians, delicate and conflict-averse, gave human students wide berth in the hallways. Others found them fascinating. The Kefrites, who respected toughness, invited humans to their social gatherings, and some, like Phip Korvath Riska, considered it an educational experience. "I was wrong about humans," Phip Korvath announced during one study session, her manipulators flying over her datapad as she compiled notes for a presentation. "We all were. We saw soft skin and assumed weakness. We didn't consider that soft skin could be a feature, not a flaw. Flexibility, adaptability, the ability to heal from injuries that would permanently damage species with rigid exoskeletons." She glanced at Cassidy, who was buried in homework at the same table. "You're not fragile. You're optimized for a different kind of survival." Cassidy looked up from her xenobiology notes. "That's probably the nicest thing anyone has said about humans since we got here. Usually it's just variations on terrifying or potentially dangerous." "You are those things too," Phip Korvath said cheerfully, "but in a teaching sort of way." 6 weeks after the incident, Cassidy finally got back to her normal routine. The staring had decreased. Whispers had mostly died down. She could eat lunch without being asked to describe Earth's deadliest predators or explain how humans survived before modern medicine. She sat at the same cafeteria table where it all had started, absorbed in her data pad. There was chocolate cake on her tray. She had reached it first, and this time, no one challenged her claim. Across the room, Zarathan finished his community service shift, cleaning tables and collecting trays. He glanced her way once, briefly, then looked away. Cassidy didn't notice. She was too absorbed in studying cellular adaptation and silicon-based life forms, the very reason she had come to Krathazik Station Academy in the first place, to learn, to study, to understand the incredible variety of life across the galaxy, and apparently to occasionally give everyone else a lesson about assumptions, physics, and the rather unwise idea of punching a species that evolved dodging meteor strikes and wrestling predators for fun. But mostly, it was about learning. That was the part that really mattered. Maybe the real question isn't why humans are so hard to break. Maybe the real question is this: after surviving a world that tried to kill them every single day, why do they still choose restraint over rage? If strength were only about violence, Earth wouldn't have lasted this long. So think about it. Would you trust the species that can fight, or the one that chooses not to?